All right, so here we are. We're back.
We're back. Say it with the right
Rachel.
voice.
And we're back.
There we go.
There it is.
Z107 or something. I don't know what it is. People, if they know that reference, like
They were with us
super high
last
five.
year.
Yeah. But anyway, Rachel, Lance, Ted, here we are. Nehemiah 7.
To the end.
through-
Rachel, Ted, Lance,
to
and
the end.
Nehemiah.
And Nehemiah.
right.
Nehemiah. Ha-ha. All right, so here we are, the end 7. This is, it kicks off with, it was weird when I was reading this. You know, I remembered last how it was like when people were like kind of like taking census. We've had a couple census, but it's like that's a bad thing. Like when you see these censuses
With David.
yeah, and just because, but it was kind of different. This is more of a humble, actual like, okay, we've been exiled, we need to account for things. Not like,
These are the people
oh
who-
man, how much stuff do I
Right.
got?
Yes.
How much blessing do
Yeah.
I have?
Yes.
So,
that's a really, really great observation.
but-
Because I think that could confuse people, and that's
Yeah.
right. With David, it was about pride and what he's doing, how many people he has, and this is about really continuity, is what this is. So it's
Yeah.
it's the same list that we saw in the beginning of Ezra, and it's really there's this continuity with the Old Testament story, which we're going to see a lot in this section, and then also the same people who came to return from exile and to build the temple. It's the same people we're talking about.
yeah. And it's helpful too to remember, like, this is like, you know, a people group. This was like their history, and so it was important to have, I guess, you know, some of this stuff documented.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, so that's kind of what a lot of 7 was. That's why we probably combined it with 7 and 8, because it's like you're just going to be reading a lot of names, numbers, and how many camels
Yeah.
and females and these people and those peoples.
Yeah, it's really just there's a theme of continuity here, which again I just said that, but it's really important as we end the Old Testament. They're back from exile, right? They're under foreign oppression. Everything looks different, but what we're trying to sort of really emphasize with these chapters is it's the same people, it's the same story as from the very beginning. So this is still the Israelites, it's God's people. What does it look like now? How do we do this? But we're still those people.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of lists to us, but that's what they're trying to communicate.
Yeah. I guess I kind of, I don't know. I kind of want to jump to 9 more. So,
Yeah,
but
I mean,
So 8 through 10 is a covenant renewal just section. So like you can sort of group those together. And so it's like, here's all the people in 7 where it's continuity with people who came back from exile. This is the remnant.
Yep.
This is God's people. And then in 8 through 10, you see this covenant renewal sort of ceremony that goes on.
yeah, because they've kind of
It is a
rebuilt the
whole
temple.
section. Yeah.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
It's new. It's kind
The
of
temple,
Yeah.
the city wall.
Yep.
And now we're here.
Yeah.
In 8, Ezra stands up and reads the law, right?
Yeah.
Before the people. And then the scribes are describing it and explaining it to the people who may not be as familiar with it. And when we get to 9, the people are moved to the place where they start to confess their sin and then renew the covenant.
Yeah.
So it starts with confession. And then I love in chapter 9, they retell
Oh my goodness.
their story, but like, oh, what do you got?
retelling of
Re-
Exodus.
Yeah,
Exodus!
there
I
you
wanted
go.
you to say it first, so I didn't say it
Yeah.
first. Ted,
Yeah.
stop talking about Exodus.
Yeah. No, you stop
Stop
talking.
making it up.
But yeah, the retelling. I mean, so I'm just some highlights in chapter 9. So starts in verse 6. Yahweh, you made and preserved creation. You chose Abram, called him Abraham, gave him a covenant. There was suffering in Egypt by his descendants. Then you rescued them. You divided the sea. You gave them the law at Sinai in person. You fed them. You cared for them. Then they disobeyed you. They made a golden calf. For 40 years, though, you preserved them in the wilderness. You gave them a land. And when they moved into the land, they prospered, but yet they disobeyed again.
Yeah.
You were patient
But
with
yet.
them. The kings, like it was all the same story on repeat. But then you get to like verse 30, there's exile. And verse 33, you have been righteous in your judgment. So that's even their more recent history. You've been righteous in your exile, Yahweh.
Yeah. And I think the thing that's encouraging about this is not to, I think the application side for us sometimes is just the the modeling of what's happening, the importance of remembering our kind of Exodus journeys, the importance of remembering back to like what we were, what we've been saved from. Because I think, just the importance of remembrance as a part of
Yeah.
not just worship, but reorienting
Identity.
and repenting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like they have to, this is who you are.
Yep.
It's all based in who God says you are, who he's called you to be, what he's done for you. That's where it's rooted. But this is who you are. And then you get to, and this is what it looks like to be that people, you know?
Yeah.
So I would also just throw out there, so next week we're going to move to Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew. And we're going to go to the New Testament. I would just reread chapter 9. Because when you get to Matthew, you're going to, like, if you just reread chapter 9 again and then start Matthew, and I think you'll see a lot of parallels there.
Yeah. So, this is part of their, what did you call
Covenant
it? Their
renewal.
covenant renewal.
Yeah, they're just sort of reaffirming who they are as a people, what God's done for them. So they read the law, and then they affirm, like they tell the story,
Yeah.
they affirm the covenant, and then you'll see them repent.
Yeah, it's kind
a
of
very common
they hear
process.
the law, they hear it,
Yeah.
and then they confess,
It's like with in
repent.
Deuteronomy, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And then in chapter 10, when they renew the covenant, 3 things stand out.
Yep.
Their commitment to marriage and not marrying foreign wives or giving their daughters away or any of that. Their commitment to the Sabbath and their commitment to giving to kingdom work. And in that, so those seem like maybe 3 random things, but they're not. When they commit to God's design for marriage, it's more about their commitment to not being influenced by the world or other religions or other gods or anything like that. Their commitment to really being influenced by Him. When they renew their covenant and their commitment to this.
I think just hold on before you jump to. I mean, I think that is a healthy thing for people to really sit in for a second, because I think a lot of what we've read in the Old Testament when it comes to this, like marrying these foreigners, it's like, oh, these people, they're bad, and it has to do with something other than what it's actually saying. I think, and it's like you just said. I want to maybe help restate that again or say it again so people really get
I think
that.
we've said it it's about idolatry.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's about, I think he actually references Solomon.
Yeah.
He married foreign wives, and that's what brought idolatry into the kingdom.
And even he
And
was
even he
idolatry.
was
And
idolatry.
even
Yeah, right.
he, and that's how it begins. And that's not about this is not about women doing this, right? We were just reading some books in our house about vices, and every single time was a girl who brought it in, and I was like, I don't know about this. So that's not about women being the ones who bring sin into the. No, I mean I know you are.
That's so funny.
I know it's so funny, but it actually is sort of a common
Those Jezebels.
I know.
just kidding.
It really does happen though. So
Yeah.
I just want to for people who are just why is it wives? Come on, dude. Sometimes it's husbands, surely, for sure. But this is about how in their patriarchal culture, how you bring in someone to your home that transforms the God that you worship and the whole culture of your home. And so it's a different time and place, and that's why it's wives every time. But that's not about their gender or sex. That's about just their culture.
Yeah.
And it's not even just about marriage.
Right.
It's about a commitment to Yahweh, the commitment to His way, and not being influenced by idolatry and the sin of the world.
Okay, good.
Okay,
The
so that's
second one.
Category
That was
number
the
one. Category number 2, their commitment to the Sabbath, which, again, that's another category you can say, oh, they're just supposed to take a day off. And we've even just wrapped up a series on Sabbath. And it's more than that. It's really trust in God's design, God's plan for their lives. Rather than their own toil, rather than filling their lives up with busyness, they are stopping to trust in God's provision, and they're stopping to have space for reflection and for worship and for wonder.
Yeah.
And so that's the second one. And then the third one is giving to kingdom work, which is an aspect of generosity, which starts with trust that, Lord, everything I have, you've provided, but now I have a responsibility to steward that. And what you want is for me to not hold it for myself, but to then going back to the call on Abraham to experience God's blessing and be a blessing. So to with what the Lord has provided you, be a blessing to others, cause others to flourish. Part of that is the work of the temple, but then another part of that is just a life of generosity.
Yeah.
That is so helpful because really, I mean, your three categories, like the first one's really about like your identity and true worship instead of idolatry. And then the second one is about, what was your second one?
The Sabbath.
Sabbath.
Trust.
So but that's about like the telos of the Christian life. That's really about, when we talk about
Telos.
Sabbath, the end goal, the
Telos.
purpose of everything. That's what that means.
Say it one more time.
Telos.
But what's the definition? One more
That
time?
means the end goal,
The
the
end
purpose
goal.
of all things.
Okay.
And so that's really what Sabbath leads us to. I think we've talked about it a lot in this podcast. But even those three
Never
categories
said
here,
that word. That's the
Well-
first I'm hearing it. That's why I'm like,
Sorry.
this is like,
But that's really what the seventh day Sabbath. It's rest,
Yeah.
and it's practical, but it's also about the end times. I don't want to say another
yeah.
word, but like it's about what their hope is essentially, and then you have the mission work after that. So it's like, this is who you are. This is what it looks like to even right now practice trusting in God and knowing what it's going to look like in the future whenever all things are made new. And then this is what it looks like to be on mission with God. It's like those three categories right there.
Yeah. And then I'll give you my 2 cents of
Come on.
breakdown of these 3 categories. It's kind of like establishing, okay, God is our God, and then how the next 2 is like how we're going to love God and how we kind of love others
That's great.
almost. So,
Yes.
Yeah.
because Sabbath is about like our relation, our kind of interaction, that time with God a little bit, and then
Yeah.
our generosity, how we're going to outwardly.
Yeah.
Interact
I
with us.
appreciate honing it down to that. That's good. Ted popped into my office yesterday, and I was working on all this, and I started talking, and he was like, "Sounds like you're writing a sermon."
Stay tuned.
I said, "I think I am, but I don't have anywhere to preach
An
it."
extra podcast. will
Yeah.
just be Lance.
That's what I said. I was
No.
like, just do it.
But yeah, I mean, here's the deal: when we take these concepts from the Old Testament, and when we read the Old Testament, there's a temptation to just think that was back then, and it's hard to understand what it means for me today. But these 3 categories have deep meaning for us today. Like, we don't talk about worldly influence around marriage because it doesn't. I mean, I think marriage plays into it, but what is the modern equivalent of worldly influence in our lives? It's all the things that we consume, all the things we see, all the things we read, all the things we
What
watch.
are you yoking yourself to?
Yeah, like what is the influence in your life?
Yep.
And there is a call on the Christian to make sure you have boundaries around the influences in your life, so that the first one you look to is the Lord. So that's why reading the scriptures is important. I've often tried to ask myself, am I being, at this point in my life, am I being more influenced by the things of the world or the things of the scriptures? That's just a helpful question for that category. And then second, Sabbath is about trust. It's about your relationship with God and how you're going to interact with Him. And when I fill my life up with the things I'm trying to do, then I'm trusting in myself. When I fill my life up with busyness and all this activity and don't have space for rest, I lose wonder, I lose reflection, I lose just the mental space to consider who God is and what He has for me and what He wants for me. And then giving to kingdom work and living generously, the modern equivalent is still generosity.
It's still
Yeah.
It's
that.
still generosity.
Yeah.
It's actually still protecting the poor and giving to God's kingdom. It still is.
Absolutely. Yeah. But we have a tendency to say, well, everything that I have in my bank account and at my home, like that's mine. I've earned it. It belongs to me. And that just causes you to focus on you and not the work of God's kingdom.
Yeah.
And so there is an aspect of, for the modern reader, we need to let the Lord work in our hearts in all 3 of these categories.
Yeah. And these 3 categories aren't new. I mean, I feel like
No.
these are themes that we've been hearing
Yep.
all throughout.
There's
the Old
there's
Testament.
nothing new.
Yeah.
I really like that would be one of my big takeaways from just working through scripture, is the pattern, which we have these categories that are on the bookmarks. The pattern is the pattern. And we're trying to return to the pattern. And that's always what God is asking. There's these summary verses, which we're going to get to some with Jesus, but in the Old Testament, it is walking with God. It is only walking with God. It's worshiping Him. It's loving Him. It's loving other people.
Yeah.
That's what it is. It's very consistent.
Yep.
Okay, so let's kind of jump ahead because we've
Yep.
kind of established like that's what's happened. They've renewed their covenant. They're like, yeah, we're all in on this. And then Nehemiah goes back, I guess, to his job as the cupbearer for a while.
Well, he goes back to the king,
Yeah.
and then he returns. And when he returns, you actually find those same three categories in reverse order.
Yeah.
So
This is now in 13.
this is now in 13, chapter 13.
It's not necessarily chronological. I
No.
think that like
No.
8 through 10 is sort of like dropped in here as this
Yeah.
covenant renewal.
Yeah.
I don't know if he like really went back and forth, but it doesn't matter.
But at some point, he looks up after
Yeah.
they have committed to do these things. And early in 13, you see that giving to the kingdom work has gone awry because those that are receiving what's being given are misusing it. And some people are not giving. And so that's not happening. The Sabbath is not being observed. They're doing commerce and all sorts of things, working on the Sabbath. And then lastly, marriage. They're taking foreign wives again, which is, again, we can't just like put marriage as the category. They're allowing themselves to be influenced by all the
They're
other,
becoming like the other nations instead of a
again,
light.
all over
Yeah.
again. And then Nehemiah, he just ends with like, God, at least
He
consider me.
He starts beating people up.
He does,
And
and he
ripping
rips
out their
their
hair,
hair.
which I'm like, you read it and you're like, oh, what is happening right here? But I'm like, we've been in the Old Testament for a long time, and I want to
We got
beat
some
up some
judges.
people and maybe
Yeah.
rip some hair out.
Right.
Yeah.
Like this
Yeah.
is the same, right? Because you get to the temple, like the cities here, the people have returned. The temple's been rebuilt. It's been like dedicated. We have the walls finally. The covenant's been renewed. We're like, here we are.
And they're slipping
And you're like,
right
and
back
no.
into it.
Like how many times? It's not even surprising. It's
Every
not
time.
surprising. We've been here. We know what it is like. I want to rip out my own hair at this
Yeah.
point because it feels like, what now? What now? So I understand his frustration.
Yeah.
I think one thing, just right quick, at the beginning of 13, it starts. It talks about the Ammonite and the Moabite, that none of them should ever enter the assembly of God, for they did not meet the people of Israel with bread and water. And I think some people can probably read that and maybe feel like, oh, like it's this exclusive place that there have been times in history where, okay, maybe people weren't allowed in, but we got to remember this was like a specific instance related to a specific event that had happened with a group of people, and then there was
Yeah.
a specific curse. So this isn't like a universal translation.
Like
that,
don't ever let those.
yeah. Well, that there's people that like, oh man, if you don't treat God's people well, then you're going to be not allowed in.
Well, I think one thing that's important to remember whenever we're reading through Ezra and Nehemiah is every time that they respond in a certain way, it's not necessarily God ordained, right? It's not like we have in some of the narratives we read when God said, you do this.
Yeah.
Or in the law, you do this. This is, they are relearning the law. That's why they have this renewal covenant. They're relearning what it means to be God's people in his place with his presence. They have been in exile. And so they're finding, this is a narrative about them finding the law and trying to interpret it and live it out as people. I don't think we need to read like the last sections of this as they're doing it exactly the right way. I would be careful about that.
Yeah.
Because we'll get to Jesus and he'll say, you've sort of missed the point here, right? You're to obey the law, but the point of it is to love God and love people, to take care of the poor, to take care of the outcast. And so I would just be careful with just like taking any of the specific things as like, oh, they were doing this exactly right.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that they were necessarily.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, we weren't supposed to do that, but it was about a specific narrative from the Old Testament, like you said.
So let's take a little bit of time because, this is the end of our reading plan of the Old Testament. Next, we begin the New Testament next week. And so I feel like I don't want to say there's a lot that happens, but there's definitely some like bridge and some time. And I think as I was looking at this, even my Bible here, it's like, okay, well, we're at the end of Nehemiah, and the New Testament doesn't start till here. And I'm like, dude, that's like a
skipped a
lot
lot.
of we skipped a lot. But then when you look at it, it's like, well, it's not in chronological order. Like all this stuff is really stuff that's happened back in
That's right.
Yep.
these pages.
Really
and so
helpful to know.
this is the end. What we're reading here, this is kind of the last in the timeline chronologically till we hit.
Right.
The New
In
Testament.
the length of the story, yes.
Yeah.
So there's about 400 years or so from the end of Nehemiah to the birth of Jesus. And there aren't biblical texts that are in our Bibles, unless you have a Bible with some the apocryphal writings. That
Do you have apocryphal
I
writings
don't
in your?
know.
Okay.
That would be the Catholic Bible.
The
the
Catholic,
Bible.
Okay.
Yep. Anyway, so
Do you own a Catholic Bible? I don't know.
I do have copies of the apocryphal writings, but not like
Not
in a
in a
Bible.
They're just
Bible.
intertestament
Yeah.
writings, though,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
were used. They were written during that period. They were used. They weren't considered scripture in the same way, but they're not bad. They're just not scripture.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's this period. It's known as the period of silence, the time of silence in Israel. That's how it was known to the Jews. There was no prophet. God wasn't speaking through a prophet, which we've talked about prophets a lot. And they were returned from exile, but nothing, right? This is how we end. It's like, oh, everyone's still not doing very well, and the temple's not as good as it used to be, and the presence of God didn't return like we saw at Mount Sinai or like we saw in the temple with Solomon. And so it's there, but it's not as good. And so if you read through any other, any of the prophets in the Old Testament, you'll see them saying, okay, this is what's happening, return to the covenant, and also something new is coming. Yeah. We need a king, right? We have these promises we've talked about. We need a king who's going to reign eternally from the line of David. We're looking for the fulfillment of the Abrahamic promise that you will be a light to nations, that the whole world will be restored through your family, and we're just not there. So it's like the middle of a story, and then there's this period of silence. So we're waiting.
So we finish this chapter in Nehemiah 13, and then next week when we start,
We jump 400 years.
We jump 400 years.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think if you want to read extra, because most people want to read more, Isaiah is known as the fifth gospel, and because it's so much about this coming Messiah, this prophetic promise of one who's coming and what that's going to look like for not just who that is, but the whole world. If you just want to sort of skim through that before you read Matthew, I think that'd be helpful too, to just think through what they were waiting for, right?
Yeah.
What it was that they were holding on to, because they're trying to live this out practically, but they were holding on to hope that God's promises were going to be completely fulfilled, that this wasn't it.
Yeah.
And I think you see that a lot in that.
When was Isaiah, when did that fall? Like it was written in the timeline up to this. Is this like pre the wall? Is this pre-Babel? Is this pre-exile or
It's
coming back? Or
yes.
I don't know how far back. I'm trying to get to the beginning of it.
So if you have an ESV study Bible, which,
Yeah.
Ted, you've got one, when you get to the end of the writings of the prophets, and it goes from Old Testament to New, there are several helpful articles that tell you about the time between the end of the history we have and the birth of Jesus. So in a second, we'll cover some of that history. But then really set the stage for you to understand the beginning of Matthew and how the world has changed from post-exile to the birth of Jesus. So
Right. Yeah, just the world itself.
Yeah.
Radical changes.
Radical changes. So I'll hit some highlights. But again, if you have an ESV study Bible, I would say read those.
Yeah, super
Read
helpful.
those articles. They're very helpful. So when we end in Nehemiah, it's the Persian Empire. That we know. You can read even more about that in Daniel and so Ezra, Nehemiah, and even Esther gives you a picture of that. But then after the Persian Empire ends in 331 BC, the Alexander the Great conquers this territory and much of the known world and ushers in the Hellenistic Empire or the Greek Empire. And after his death, his kingdom splits into four ways. But the Hellenistic period goes until 164 BC. It's not quite 200 years.
And sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
well, you were going to say something. I feel like you should
Well, I was
say
just
something.
saying, one of the important, something important that comes from that is that what he tried to do was have a common language. So
Yep.
Greek becomes the common language during this time period. So there's going to be a common language throughout this entire area of the world, Greek.
Which is why the New Testament is written in Greek, not Hebrew. The Old Testament is mostly written in Hebrew with a little bit of Aramaic. But so when his kingdom splits, the two ones to keep an eye on are the Ptolemaic Empire and the Seleucid. Did I say that right?
Sure.
They become the Syrians. So the Egyptians and the Syrians. So this area where Jerusalem is ruled by the Egyptian offshoot, and then later that's all conquered by the Syrians. Then they are persecuted. It's a really terrible time to be Jewish.
Terrible time.
And so
Outlawed.
Yep. In 164 BC, you have the Hasmonean dynasty or the Maccabean revolt. So these Jewish people, they finally fight and claim their independence. And you have from there, for about 100 years, from 164 BC to 63 BC, you have 9 successive rulers from the same family. And it seems to go well. They have their independence, but each one gets worse and worse. We know that story.
Yeah.
We've seen it. They become
Shocking.
increasingly dictatorial, corrupt, immoral, and eventually they're pagan. The rulers of Israel at this time are pagan. And so when you get to 64 BC, you have Jewish people who are looking at their own leaders and saying, this isn't good. They appeal to Rome, who is now the superpower, and say, please come help us. Please come free us from our own dictators. And so Pompey comes in and provides freedom, like wipes out all these rulers. But when Pompey walks into Jerusalem, he goes to the temple and walks into the temple and then into the holy place himself. And that does not sit well with the Jews. And that begins this undercurrent of Roman rule over the Jewish state, but they're suspicious. And it's just confrontational.
And they invited him in.
They invited him in.
And he waltzes all
Because
the way
of
in.
foreign oppression, because of hypocrisy within. I mean, there are all sorts of things going on. But this, like, I think that we sort of can skip over this. Like, I love that we're doing the story. Obviously, everyone knows that. But this time period can be skipped over. So the cultural significance of what's been going on helps you set up for their expectations for what a Messiah would look like. So they know they're waiting for a Messiah. We know that from the prophets. But this is what their hope is in. They're being oppressed by foreign nations. There's hypocrisy everywhere. They're supposed to be a kingdom with their own temple, with their own place. And this is what it's turned to. But also, God is so at work when you're just reading through the history, like this common language, it's their Greek language. Whenever you see after, Jesus' ascension, whenever he sends his disciples out, they have a common language to go proclaim the gospel. The Roman roads, right? There's a whole system of ways to travel throughout the world. There's because of the exile, there's all these synagogues that start to pop up everywhere. And that's where you see Paul, that's the first place he'll preach the gospel, a synagogue, and then to the Gentiles. And so, sometimes even whenever God is silent, he is working and moving.
Yeah.
So you just have to trust that God's promises are true. His plans are going to come to fruition, even if it feels like the darkest period of your history.
Yep.
So it feels dark, but we know from different prophets in the Old Testament, specifically Isaiah, that there is hope to come.
Jeremiah, yeah. And also, I would just say too, with Nehemiah, we end it, and he's like, oh, y'all are the worst. I'm going to pull your hair out. I'm going to beat you up. Because they have everything they're supposed to have, but their hearts are still hard, right? They still have stiff necks, just like the people at the time of Moses. And so, the prophet Jeremiah will say, there's going to come a time whenever your hearts are going to be changed. Your hearts are going to be renewed, and my spirit is going to be poured out on you. And that's what we know. That's what we know that they need. Like, nothing is changing. We've done this cycle so many times, and nothing is changing. There has to be a completely new thing.
Yep. So this year, we said that the reading plan was the story of Scripture. Last year, we just read through all of the New Testament, always helpful. But to understand the New Testament in its fullness, you need to see that it is in a continuation of the story of Israel, which begins in the Old Testament. So that's why we've taken this year and so long, we're in September, to get through the story of Israel. And I want to take us real quick all the way back to Eden. I think we can think of we can get the wrong picture of Eden in our minds, in that, like, oh, the design for humanity was always to just be in this paradise place where they're with God and that's it, and they broke it. But and all that's true, except that the plan for humans wasn't to just stay in this little garden. It was that the garden was a place where they experienced God's presence and the flourishing of life so that they could rule creation and take his kingdom out into the chaotic world. That was always the plan, and they didn't trust in God's plan. And then we've talked all year long about the way people do what Adam and Eve did in the garden originally. They see and they take. They see and they take, instead of trusting in God's plan and being part of his mission. And we've seen see and take, see and take, see and take so far all year long in the story of Israel. And so when it ends in Nehemiah, where we just wrapped up, it's like, is this ever going to work? Is God's plan that started at the very beginning ever going to work, where people will bear his image and push his kingdom out into the world because they experience his blessing and they're going to be a blessing? Or will people just continue to see and take? And it's kind of like the Old Testament ends like with a shrug. I don't know if it's ever going to work out, but there's this promise and this hopeful anticipation that it will one day. It hasn't yet.
What? Was that your stomach?
It was my
Are you
stomach. I'm
hungry?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. I was like, I looked at like you didn't have anything to say, but your stomach just did.
No, I did.
Sorry.
Yeah.
What were we gonna say?
Well, we're cutting it before my stomach started
I don't
making
know.
noises.
Yeah,
No,
leave it.
They
leave it
couldn't
in.
hear it.
Oh, classic. No, I would just say that because we took so long in the Old Testament. I mean, we've said before, like I think you said a few weeks ago, like I'm tired of the Old Testament,
Yeah.
which is fair. I feel it. I feel like I feel it. I'm like, I am so desperate for a different story now. I'm so desperate for someone who doesn't fail. I'm so desperate for a king who's good and true and consistent and faithful. You know, I just feel it. Like I'm so in hope of something new that's happening. So it's a good thing to be sitting in it for so long, because that's the story.
Yeah. And if we're going to see Jesus rightly, we have to see him as the fulfillment of the story of Israel, not just as his own thing, starting a new thing. He jumps into an existing story. So to understand that story means you can understand Jesus more fully.
Why don't we end this? You have it pulled up?
Yeah, go for
End
it. You read it. 1 through 5. 11, 1 through 5.
Yeah, no, just kind of reading an excerpt from Isaiah, something that's really pointing to, because you said like this
It's the
hope of what's to come. And so this is from Isaiah 11, 1 through 5. It says, "There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and fear of the Lord," or Yahweh. "And his delight shall be in the fear of the..." I want to say Yahweh, but looks like I said. "So, and his delight shall be in the fear of Yahweh, and he shall not judge by what his eyes see, or decide disputes by what his ears hears, but with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt of his waist, and faithfulness the belt of his loins." So it's really a hopeful picture of who is to come and what it's going to be like, what he's going to bring with him.
Yeah,
So.
we need him.
You can subscribe to receive additional resources to help you study the story of Scripture at clearcreekresources.org. We'll see you next week.